Hello, this is Hamza again from GamingOnLinux.com, and today I'm taking a look at Sol Zero Mars Colonization, which, as the name might already tell you, is a colony builder by Conrad Games in which you need to establish a Mars colony. The game basically starts out with you sending your very first stuff onto Mars. Basically, you want to send some exploration rovers to map the Martian surface a little, and then you will eventually send astronauts onto Mars and then set up your permanent colony there and try to basically survive in the Martian environment. So the game starts out basically with you sending a whole lot of stuff to Mars via rockets, which you can send at certain intervals. So between these intervals you basically are on your own, but with these rocket launches you can bring in more people, you can bring in various kinds of equipment and supplies, which are definitely necessary, especially in the beginning when you don't have all this stuff available to you, which you need to be completely independent from Earth. So you are kind of relying on the stuff that you can bring from Earth initially, but over time when your colony starts growing up a little, and you unlock more buildings like 3D printers and ore refineries, which you can then use to mine the Martian surface for basic supplies, you can then start to actually become more independent. And one of the goals of the game is actually to declare independence from Earth, which will completely cut off all the rocket launches, and then you will have to rely on the stuff that you have. The gameplay is quite simple. A good chunk of the gameplay is managing your supplies. Naturally you need oxygen, you need food, you need water, and then you also need these special supplies which are used to build these various kinds of buildings. And of course buildings are very important because that's how you, for example, extract water from local ice sources, it's how you generate oxygen, it's how you build farms which are necessary for you to produce enough food. If you fail at this, your colonists will start to die, and eventually the colony will be completely empty. So you naturally need to take care of that. In addition to managing supplies, there are also some random events which can also have an effect on your colony. So these are sort of like things that make the game a little bit more difficult for you, because if you were just managing supplies it would be fairly easy. You just need to be careful with your planning and just move on with that. But these events make it a little bit more difficult. There are things like dust storms which are going to block your solar panels from working properly, so you will start to encounter power losses which are going to affect equipment. There are meteor showers that are simply going to destroy parts of the colony, and sometimes you might even rupture the habitats of your colony, which can then lead to people just flying out into the vacuum of space. Definitely a fun looking, but not necessarily all that fun when you want to progress. You also need to take care of your colony population so that you have enough people in your colony, because the game has this sort of a mechanic that if you don't grow the population on your colony, things are going to start to malfunction. You will see random malfunctions here and there, you will see frozen pipes, and I suppose this is explained by that you need people that maintain these various kinds of pieces of equipment. So if you don't have enough people, you will also see these random smaller events which usually just lead to malfunctioning equipment, which will then usually result in food loss or water loss. The game is fairly simple. There isn't anything particularly revolutionary in the design. It's a fairly simple colony builder by colony builder standards, and there are a couple of interesting elements to it. For example, when you start to build farms instead of greenhouses, you get the chance to genetically modify these types of flora in order to make them more resistant to the Martian environment, and this way you make them more profitable. And there is this sort of an interesting little thing where you combine various kinds of microflora to generate this crop that you're then going to farm on your farms. But that's basically as much depth as you're going to get from this game. There isn't like a whole lot of complex mechanics. It's fairly basic. The game isn't particularly revolutionary graphically either. The graphics are okay, but of course they are not, they are about the Kerbal Space Program level graphics, or slightly less beautiful. But of course this does mean that the game also doesn't require a whole lot of processing power in order for you to play it. So that's definitely a plus for those that are running on like lower end systems. It seems to work even on Intel HD Graphics 3000. I did definitely test it, but I imagine when you start growing your colony a little, it might actually get a little bit slower. On my rig with the Radeon R7 370, it did slow down a little bit, but not particularly much. But yeah, it does definitely slow down, and on like super low end systems it might definitely be a little bit too slow. There are also a couple of small annoyances with the game. For example, when you do a rocket launch, when you enter the rocket launch menu, you cannot actually back out from that. So if you didn't actually want to launch a rocket and you ended up clicking the launch button, you then have to actually launch a rocket. There is like no way to cancel the launch. And this is especially bad because there is this building called a launch pad, which you build on your colony, which will allow you to bring in these bigger rockets, which can carry a lot more stuff. They can carry colonists and better equipment than the normal rockets. So that means you only have the option to send in the smaller rocket, which can basically only carries a little bit of food, maybe some astronauts, and you know, it's very basic. So I would definitely love to see see a cancel button on the launch menu, so that I could actually go back and, you know, maybe empty the launch pad, send the rocket that I have already on my colony, send that away so that the launch pad is now free, and then I can send it the bigger rockets. The game also requires all the habitats and hallways of your colony to be connected. This is probably a gameplay decision made by the devs, but it also means that your colony basically cannot be split up into multiple sort of smaller colonies, and this is sometimes a little bit of a problem when you start planning your colony, because you can sort of, if you place something in the wrong place, you might have to demolish that entirely because you cannot like build anywhere else, or you might simply run out of space. So you need to actually plan quite a bit ahead when you start actually placing the hallways down onto Mars, because you cannot really move that stuff away once you have placed it. You can, of course, there is a way to demolish stuff. I actually didn't find out about this until I went to the forums, and this is kind of tied to my third issue with the game. The UI is not particularly simple. It's like some of the functionality is kind of hidden away behind some like small buttons with just, you know, some icons, and this is a little bit too confusing for me. Like, I would definitely like to see more tooltips when I hover over some of the buttons, and preferably even more text, because sometimes I simply have been struggling to find certain functionality. For example, the demolish button for buildings, I simply couldn't find that anywhere. So I was originally kind of stuck because I built my colony in a horrible way, and I then couldn't demolish it because I didn't find the functionality for it. But thanks to the forums, I actually now know that there is such functionality. So that's definitely good. That would have been my third complaints about the game, actually fourth complaints about the game, but since I know that that functionality is there, I'm not going to complain about it. Instead, I'm going to complain about the UI being too confusing. But then again, even though I have levied some criticisms against this game, it's the pricing why I wanted to look at this game. So the game costs €6, and that's full price without a discount, and once it's discounted it can go, like during summer sales, I imagine the game will probably be at around €3. And considering that price, the game actually isn't too bad. I mean, I've played the game for about 4 hours now, and it definitely, even though the game is quite simple and it's not particularly revolutionary, and it's definitely not quite as in-depth as something like Kerbal Space Program, where you can play it for thousands of hours and still be relatively noobish, it's still a good game. Like, it works quite well, the gameplay is pretty much there. Of course, this isn't something that you will play for tens and tens of hours. It's probably something you will play for maybe 4 or 6 hours, and maybe you will probably, if you want to unlock all of the stuff, you basically need to play 3 of the maps, and completing one of the maps took me around 4 hours, so let's say maybe 10 hours if you want to unlock all of this stuff. There is one secret mission that requires you to terraform 3 areas of the map, and there are, like, the game gives you a set of maps that you can play on, and the game also has support for the Steam Workshop, and it comes with a level editor, so I suppose if you really wanted to extend the experience, then you also have some additional tools and resources to actually get a little bit more out of the experience, if you are into that kind of thing. But really, the pricing was the reason why I wanted to look at this game, and it's really the reason why I decided to pick this game up. I think this is something that you might want to keep an eye out if you are sort of on the budget and you want some sort of a colony builder. It's quite simple, it's not particularly revolutionary, but you will get a couple of hours of entertainment out of it for basically very little money. So yeah, definitely take a look at Sol Zero Mars Colonization. It's cheap, and it might very well be worth your time and worth your money. But yeah, that's it for Sol Zero Mars Colonization, and we will see in future videos.